Hi guys, how old are you? I'd love to see the age range of our viewers. Write your age below.
They forgot my birthday again. Not like it was the first time, but this time, something shifted. There wasn't a dramatic moment. No screaming match, no confrontation in the driveway, no flying plates or slammed doors. It was quieter than that, quieter than a sigh. And somehow that made it worse. This year, I didn't even expect a call. I didn't even keep my phone nearby, not really, but somewhere, maybe in the back of my chest. I still hoped, still waited. That pathetic flicker of maybe this time lingered longer than I'd like to admit. And just like every other year, that flicker went out around 7:30 in the evening when it became undeniable that no one was going to say anything. Instead, I got a group text from Mom, a blurry photo of Brian standing next to a cherry red motorcycle in their garage, grinning like a golden retriever. The caption read, "Brian's surprise arrived. He's speechless." And right under that, she wrote, "Dad and I are just so proud of him." I stared at that text longer than I should have. Just sat there, on the couch in my tiny, quiet apartment, holding my phone like it might suddenly change its mind. There was no "sorry we missed your birthday," no running late, not even a happy belated, nothing. Like the day didn't exist, like I didn't exist. Not in the way Brian did anyway. I didn't cry. That would have made it cleaner. A cry would have been a release, but this wasn't a sharp kind of pain. It was dull, like a bruise that's been stepped on one too many times. Like something that had gone numb over the years, but still throbbed when the light hit it just right. And that light came in the form of that photo. Brian, 29, unemployed for the fourth time in 6 years, holding a goddamn $16,000 machine while I was still covering my parents' overdue utility bills like a fool. They never asked me directly. That's the genius of it. Mom would call, voice all wobbly, talking about how hard times were, how insurance didn't cover Dad's prescriptions anymore, how their mortgage company was acting funny again. And I'd fix it, every time, quietly, efficiently, like some invisible third parent who just happened to live in a one-bedroom condo 20 minutes away. I used to think I did it out of love. I don't know anymore. Maybe I just didn't know how to say no. And birthdays? Forget it. When I turned 30, they were out of town. Florida cruise with Dad's bowling league buddies. When I turned 35, I bought myself a cake and told people I preferred it that way. Less pressure, I'd say. I'm not big on birthdays. But the truth was, I was big on being seen, just once. Just enough to know I mattered to someone other than myself. And every year they reminded me, Brian was the star and I was the backstage crew, quiet, reliable, invisible. That night I made myself dinner, leftover salmon and a microwaved sweet potato, lit a candle, not a birthday candle, just one of those lavender ones I keep on the counter. I sat there chewing, staring out the window at nothing. My phone buzzed once. It was Brian. "Check out the bike," he texted, and attached a video of him revving the engine. He didn't mention my birthday either. I guess that runs in the family. You know what's funny? I paid the down payment on that motorcycle. Not directly, of course. But 3 months earlier, I'd quietly wired money into Mom's account when she said they were behind on their taxes again. "Brian's gonna be so stressed if we lose the house," she'd said. Like that was the only reason she needed help. Not because she was stressed, not because Dad was sick, but because Brian might feel sad. So I sent the money. And I know deep down some of that cash bought the bow they stuck on his new bike. I didn't respond to the group text. I didn't like the photo. I didn't even watch the video. I just closed my phone, set it face down on the coffee table, and sat in silence. And that's when something inside me went still, like a machine that had been humming in the background for decades just clicked off. I didn't rage. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just stopped. Something ended in me that night, and nobody noticed. That's the part that gets me. They didn't even notice. The candle on the table burned out around midnight. I let it. Didn't even blow it out. Just watched it shrink and vanish on its own. And as that little flame faded into smoke, I realized something. I was done being the unlit candle in the room, done lighting up their lives while sitting in the dark, done saving people who couldn't be bothered to remember the day I was born. And the worst part? I knew they wouldn't realize what they lost until it was too late. Because the thing about people like me, we don't scream when we're done, we vanish. Quietly, completely. And when we leave, we take everything we used to carry. Every favor, every dollar, every silent sacrifice. They don't know it yet, but the party's over. And I was the one footing the bill. The next morning, I didn't wake up angry. I didn't stew in some dramatic pit of betrayal. I woke up and made coffee like I always do. Strong, black, no sugar. Sat at my kitchen table and stared at the text again. The one with the motorcycle. The one with Brian smiling like he'd won the goddamn lottery. I didn't even know they had a garage big enough to fit a bike like that. Then again, I never asked. And they never offered. That's how it always went. Everyone playing dumb, smiling through the rot. The silence between me and them stretched across the day like a rope pulled too tight. You know that feeling when a dam's about to break, but the water's calm on top? That was me, all day. Calm, composed, quiet, on the surface. Underneath, though, something was growing teeth. Not rage, not vengeance. Something colder, something harder, something that had waited its turn for too many years. I didn't go to work that day. I called out. First time in over 3 years. Just sat in my chair, phone in one hand, remote in the other, flipping through a bunch of reality shows. With people yelling about things that didn't matter while the real shit inside me sat, unsaid. Around noon, my cousin Tara texted me. Just a quick, "Hey, saw Brian got a bike. That's wild lol." And then after a pause, the real question. Did they do anything for your B-Day? I stared at the screen, didn't answer. Because how do you answer a question like that when you're 37 years old and the people who brought you into this world couldn't even manage a damn card? I scrolled through Facebook, not really looking for anything. And there it was, my mom had posted a photo album titled "Our Boy Deserves the Best." 12 pictures, Brian unwrapping the keys, Brian hugging mom, Brian posing in his leather jacket, the caption underneath the first photo. It was a big decision, but after everything he's been through, we just wanted to show him how proud we are. I read that sentence so many times the words stopped meaning anything. After everything he's been through? What about everything I carried so he could stumble through life without consequences? What about the semester he flunked out of college and I paid the tuition so my parents wouldn't lose the loan deposit? What about the DUI he got 5 years ago and I took out a personal loan to cover the legal fees so he wouldn't have a record? What about the dozen times he moved back in with them, unemployed, and I covered groceries, car payments, internet bills, because God forbid Brian feels stressed? Did they forget all that? Or did they just not care? That night, they threw him a party. Backyard lit with string lights. My mom in a red blouse, holding one of those novelty wine glasses that says, "Wine not?" Dad standing by the grill like it was a family reunion. Everyone smiling. The whole damn neighborhood probably invited. I know, because Brian live-streamed the whole thing on Instagram. And I watched. Every second, like a fool. They hadn't done anything like that for me since I was 10 years old. Not a party, not a dinner, not even a lunch. For my 30th birthday, they mailed me a $50 check that bounced. I didn't even cash it. I knew better. Still kept it, though. Taped it to the inside of my kitchen cabinet, as a reminder. I watched Brian raise a beer and shout, "To the best parents in the world," and everyone cheered. I sat there on my couch in the dark, one hand gripping the wine glass I'd poured myself, store-brand Cabernet, lukewarm because I forgot the fridge, and I swear something inside me just stopped working, like a fuse blew. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even throw the glass, though I thought about it. I just turned off my phone. And in that silence, something new started to grow. That night, I logged into my online banking, every automatic payment I had set up, for their mortgage, their insurance premiums, the gas bill, even the damn Netflix account tied to my email. I canceled it all, quietly, one by one, no warning, no announcement, just Click, gone, click, gone. I'd been running their lives from the background like some unpaid administrator, some ghost accountant they only remembered when shit hit the fan. Not anymore. I didn't do it out of spite, at least not at first. I did it because I realized I was part of the problem. I had made myself into the safety net they kept falling into, and they never once asked what that cost me. They just assumed I'd keep catching them. They were celebrating in the yard, huh? While I was cutting them off behind the scenes like a surgeon slicing away rot. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. They wouldn't notice, not yet. That was the worst part. They wouldn't even feel the loss until something went wrong, until the lights turned off or the mortgage bounced or their prescription wasn't filled. And when that day came, they'd panic. They'd call me, and I wouldn't answer. You know the most dangerous thing about someone like me? We don't yell when we're fed up. We get quiet, we get methodical, we make spreadsheets, and then we disappear. The next morning, I woke up to another message from Mom. Hope you saw Brian's big surprise. He's so happy. Love you, sweetie. No question about where I was, no mention of my birthday, no awareness, just a smiley face at the end like a slap. I stared at that text for a long time, then hit mute on the family group chat. Not delete, not block, just mute, permanent silence. I wasn't going to play the angry daughter card. I wasn't going to lecture them about fairness or beg them to see me. I wasn't going to ask for what I should have already had, because asking for love should never feel like negotiating for scraps. And after almost 4 decades of being their second thought, I finally decided to be my own first. The thing about silence is that people don't notice it right away. Not if they're used to you saying very little to begin with. It creeps in like fog, slow, steady, and nearly invisible, until suddenly you're surrounded by it and nothing feels the same. I didn't announce anything. I didn't call them to declare some dramatic break. I didn't write a long, teary message about how hurt I was, or how I felt like a stranger in my own family. I didn't even post something vague on Facebook, hoping they'd read between the lines. I just stopped responding. When the first email from the mortgage company hit Dad's inbox, I know he must have thought it was a clerical error. The payment hadn't gone through, and the account was marked inactive. Normally, I'd be on the phone with them within minutes, smoothing it over, transferring funds, handling the mess before anyone even knew there was a mess. But this time, I didn't even open the message. I let it sit there in the inbox, unopened, a quiet little warning shot. I pictured Dad calling the bank, growing frustrated, using that voice that always got louder when he didn't understand something, and I felt nothing. Not guilt, not triumph, just peace. Not the kind that feels warm and fuzzy, but the kind that feels like a locked door with you on the safe side of it. Mom was next. She called around 9 in the morning that Thursday, just her name lighting up my phone screen without a message. Usually that meant she needed something. Sometimes it was small, help ordering from Amazon, help with a health insurance form, help moving money from one account to another. Other times it was bigger, confusing bills, sudden fees, things she didn't want Dad to know about. I used to answer every single call, sometimes even from the bathroom at work, just so she wouldn't feel overwhelmed. I didn't answer this time. I let it ring, let it go to voicemail. I didn't even listen to the message. I watched the little red icon sit there like a dare. There was no sudden explosion, no frantic knocking at my door, no guilt-drenched text saying, "Are you mad at us?" It was just a growing confusion on their end, and a spreading calm on mine. The storm I'd carried for years was finally outside of me, and now it was their turn to stand in the rain. It took them 5 full days to realize I hadn't said a single word since Brian's motorcycle surprise. 5 days during which I didn't acknowledge a single message, didn't send a single reminder, didn't fix a single thing. On day 6, I got a group message from Dad. Just a casual, "Hey hon, can you check on the gas bill? Think there's a mix-up?" I almost laughed. A mix-up. As if the absence of me doing everything for them had to be a system error. As if I couldn't possibly have chosen not to help. I didn't reply. I didn't open the app. I didn't even let myself rehearse what I would have said. That was the old me, the me who always drafted the perfect response, edited it 10 times, softened the blows, and swallowed her own truth in favor of keeping the family boat from rocking. That Hannah had retired, quietly, with no party, no fanfare, just gone. On the 7th day, Mom called again. This time she left a message. "Hi, sweetie, just wondering if everything's okay. Haven't heard from you. Your dad's been really stressed with this billing stuff, and Brian's been... Well, he's trying his best, you know. I hope you're not upset. Anyway, call me when you can. Love you." I listened to the message twice. First for the words, then for what wasn't said. She didn't mention my birthday. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't even ask why I'd gone silent. Because deep down, I think she already knew. But naming it would mean facing it. And that had never been her strong suit. There's something sobering about realizing your absence is only felt when it causes inconvenience. I wasn't missed. My presence wasn't longed for. What they missed was the labor. Emotional, financial, logistical, the endless patchwork I did behind the scenes to keep the family ship from sinking. Without me, they had to start noticing all the leaks they used to pretend didn't exist. Meanwhile, I was rediscovering what it felt like to live without always bracing for someone else's emergency. I went to work, came home, cooked for myself, watched movies no one else wanted to watch, took long showers without answering 5 missed calls. I started reading books again, real ones, not articles about tax laws or Medicare coverage, or how to refinance a second mortgage. I slept better than I had in years. No more late-night emails, no more panic attacks at the thought of saying no, no more resentment buried under layers of duty. Brian texted once during that time, just a short message that said, "Hey, you okay? Haven't seen you in a bit." No mention of the birthday, no mention of the party, just a casual check-in like we were neighbors and not two people whose lives had been fundamentally tilted in opposite directions for 3 decades. I stared at it for a long time and then did something I'd never done before. I deleted the conversation, not archived, not saved for later, just gone, a clean cut. People think silence is passive. They think it's cowardly or cold or lazy, but what they don't understand is that silence can be the most powerful thing in the world. When it's deliberate, when it's earned, when it comes after a lifetime of giving voice to everyone but yourself. I wasn't punishing them. I wasn't trying to hurt them. I was just letting the weight they put on me finally fall. And if that weight crushed something on its way down, well, maybe it was never built strong enough to last in the first place. By the end of the 2nd week, the silence had started to echo. It wasn't just the missed payments anymore. It wasn't just the forgotten appointments or the online accounts they could no longer access. It was the steady unraveling of a structure that had always depended on invisible scaffolding. Me. I had been their backup plan, their fallback, the quiet fixer behind the curtain. But when I removed myself from that role, even without saying a word, the house they had built on guilt and denial began to groan under its own weight. And slowly, the cracks began to show. I didn't check in, not once, not with Mom, not with Dad, not with Brian. I didn't answer texts, didn't open emails, didn't acknowledge the passive-aggressive comments they began to post online, cryptic little jabs about certain people forgetting family is forever, or the real meaning of loyalty. I saw them, I saw every word, and I didn't flinch. They could throw their digital tantrums all they wanted. I wasn't stepping back into the line of fire. It started with the electricity. The house was on a budget billing plan through my account tied to my credit. I had set it up 3 years ago after a winter where their power had nearly been shut off. And Dad had called in a panic, trying to make sense of a $500 bill in the middle of January. I paid it, of course, and I set it all up so they'd never have to worry about it again. But now that the account was closed, the bill came due in full, and apparently nobody had remembered to check the mail until the lights flickered and the living room went dark one evening while they were watching television. I didn't hear about it directly, of course. Tara told me. She's always been the family's unofficial messenger, the one who tries to keep everyone tethered together, even when things are coming apart at the seams. She called me that night, her voice low like we were sharing a secret. She told me the power had gone out and that Dad had lost his temper trying to talk to the customer service rep. Apparently, the account was listed under my name, and when they tried to take over the billing, the rep said they'd need written consent, which, of course, they didn't have because I hadn't given it. Tara asked me, gently, if I'd be willing to call and sort it out. She didn't push. She just laid it out like a question floating in the middle of the room, hoping I'd reach for it. I didn't. I thanked her for letting me know and hung up. I didn't explain myself. I didn't offer a timeline. I didn't soften the blow. I simply didn't engage. A few days later, the real panic began to take root. The insurance premiums hadn't been paid, which meant their coverage lapsed without warning. My mother called twice in a row, which she only ever did when something was truly wrong. The voicemails were rambling and urgent, her voice cracking in that way she does when she's scared, but trying not to sound like it. She mentioned prescriptions, doctor visits, blood pressure medication. Then she pivoted, like she always did, into guilt. "We just didn't know, Hannah. We didn't realize you'd taken care of so much. We should have asked more questions. We just trusted you." And that part, that last sentence, it wasn't really an apology. It was an accusation in disguise. They trusted me, so how dare I stop? I played the voicemail once and then deleted it. I didn't need to hear it again. The soundtrack of their crisis was nothing new to me. I'd lived in it for years, patching every leak, managing every oversight, covering every financial blind spot. I had done it because I thought that's what love looked like. I had done it because it was easier to just handle it than to explain why I shouldn't have to. But now I was learning something else. Love isn't martyrdom, and peace isn't selfishness. Word began to spread that I was acting distant. A neighbor told Tara, who told my aunt, who finally called me herself, concerned. She used phrases like family bond and your poor mother and surely it was just a misunderstanding. I let her talk. I let her wrap it all in sweet words and soft concern, and then I told her, without anger, without venom, that I was no longer in the business of running other people's lives while mine sat empty. She paused for a moment, probably surprised I hadn't raised my voice or broken into tears. Then she said she hoped I'd find my way back. I didn't correct her because I hadn't lost my way. I had finally stepped onto solid ground for the first time in years. Brian reached out next. His message was longer this time, which was rare. Usually he stuck to emojis and one-word replies. But this time, he wrote, "Hey, I don't know what's going on exactly, but Mom and Dad are freaking out. They said you were upset about your birthday, and look, I get that. But can we just talk? Like normal people?" The sheer absurdity of that line, like normal people, hit me like a slap. As if there had ever been anything normal about the way this family operated. As if ignoring someone's existence until they became too useful to ignore was just a minor misstep, easily repaired with a text and a shrug. I didn't reply to him either. Instead, I poured a glass of wine, sat on my balcony as the sun dipped behind the trees, and breathed in the quiet. For the first time in years, I didn't feel stretched thin. I didn't feel like I was on call, like I was waiting for the next fire to put out, the next emergency to absorb. I felt like a woman who had stopped running a marathon no one else knew she was in. Let them stumble. Let them figure out how to stand without leaning on me. Let the cracks widen and show them just how much they relied on the one person they never truly saw. Because the truth is, they didn't lose me in a single moment. They lost me slowly, over years of taking without giving, of calling without asking how I was, of leaning without ever offering to hold. And now that I'm gone, the silence will teach them what my words never could. The first time my mother showed up at my front door, I didn't answer. I was home. I just didn't move. I watched her through the peephole as she stood there clutching a white bakery box in both hands. Probably a cake or some sad attempt at making up for years of forgetfulness, wrapped in pink frosting and hollow words. Her posture was stiff, as if she wasn't sure whether she was here to apologize or to remind me of my obligations. I knew that box probably held something vanilla and dry, like the way she always approached my emotions. Just sweet enough to pretend it meant something, but bland enough to forget by the next day. She knocked 3 times, not loud, not urgent, more like a neighbor borrowing sugar than a mother reaching out to her daughter. Then she waited. I could see her shifting from foot to foot, checking her phone like maybe she hoped I'd text back a quick, "Be there soon," and swing the door open with a smile. Instead, I stood in the hallway in socks and silence, not even breathing too hard, letting her fidget on my welcome mat while the cake probably wilted in the morning heat. After about 6 minutes, she set the box down carefully, glanced around as if she were being watched, and walked back to her car. The sound of her engine fading down the street didn't bring relief. It brought clarity. That moment, standing just feet away from the woman who gave birth to me and choosing not to be seen, felt like the most honest exchange we'd had in years. The next time she reached out, it wasn't with baked goods or a soft knock, but through a handwritten letter. I found it in my mailbox 3 days later, her familiar cursive spelling out my name on the envelope like I was a distant cousin or some lost pen pal. The letter was long, careful, and packed with the kind of emotional deflection she had perfected over a lifetime. She didn't start with "I'm sorry" or "I was wrong." Instead, she led with confusion, asking if she had somehow done something to offend me, as though forgetting my birthday year after year was a mystery wrapped in good intentions. She asked about work, about whether I was seeing anyone new, about whether I still went to that little cafe I used to like. Little tidbits meant to sound familiar, like she remembered who I was when really they were just borrowed phrases from a relationship that never truly formed in the way she believed it had. And buried at the bottom, as if it were an afterthought rather than the entire reason for her reaching out, was the sentence that summed it all up. "Your father and I are going through a hard time, and we could really use your help right now." There it was, the real reason. Not love, not guilt, not a genuine attempt to make things right. Just need. Financial, logistical, emotional need. I folded the letter in half and slid it back into the envelope. I didn't throw it away. I kept it, actually. Added it to a growing stack in my desk drawer labeled "Reasons." By the time my father reached out himself, a rare thing since he preferred to send messages through my mother like some aging general too proud to face the battlefield, things had begun to fall apart more visibly. According to Tara, they'd received a final notice on the second mortgage, the one I had secretly refinanced 2 years earlier to keep them from defaulting. When I stopped paying, the house began to eat itself. Interest ballooned, late fees stacked up, and they were now in danger of losing the very roof they had offered as Brian's fallback nest for most of his adult life. I wondered if he was still sleeping there, curled up in his childhood room, surrounded by trophies he hadn't earned and praise that had never been questioned. My father's voice on the phone message was different. Not angry, not loud, not even disappointed, just tired. He said my name slowly, like he hadn't spoken it out loud in a while. "Hannah, we need to talk. I know we've made mistakes. I know I wasn't always the easiest father, but we're your family, and family doesn't walk away." That last line sat with me longer than I expected it to, not because it hurt, but because it felt so profoundly dishonest. Family walks away all the time. Sometimes they walk away by forgetting your birthday for 10 straight years. Sometimes they walk away by ignoring every sacrifice you've made. Sometimes they do it without even moving, without raising their voice, without leaving the house, just by never really seeing you in the first place. I thought about calling him back. I did. I stared at the phone in my hand for 10 minutes, my thumb hovering over the contact like it might burn, but I didn't press it. I put the phone down and went outside instead, walked around the block, felt the sun on my face in a way I hadn't in years. And in that walk, in that simple act of moving forward without looking back, I made my decision. They wanted me to return to the role I had always played, the fixer, the quiet supporter, the daughter who never complained, never asked for anything, never made it about herself. But I had already left that version of me behind. And returning now would be like climbing back into a house that was already on fire just because someone inside finally noticed the smoke. Brian texted again. This time it was shorter. "Mom's really upset. Just talk to her, please. For me. For him, always for him, for his peace of mind, for his comfort, for his image of a family that functioned as long as I stayed quiet. I didn't reply. I didn't even open it. I took a screenshot, added it to the folder, and archived the conversation. I don't know if they'll ever truly understand what they lost. Not just the money, not just the support, but the presence, the person, the daughter, the woman who had bent herself backward so far, she forgot what standing straight even felt like. When they finally noticed me, I was gone. Not missing, not vanished, just unreachable. Not in some dramatic, storm out kind of way, but in the quiet, final way that happens when someone chooses peace over participation. I had always been their backup plan. Now, they'd have to make a new one. There's something strangely sobering about looking back at the choices you made and realizing how many of them were driven not by love in its purest sense, but by an unspoken, unconscious desperation to be valued, to be chosen, to matter more than the role you were assigned. I spent years doing things for my parents that no one asked me to do, but everyone silently expected. And not once did I stop long enough to ask why I kept doing them. I convinced myself it was love. I told myself I was the responsible one, the grown-up child, the one who understood how hard life could be. But looking back now, with distance and silence stretched out between us like a canyon, I realized I wasn't loving them. I was trying to earn them. The first time I paid one of their bills, I was 23 and had just landed my first full-time job. It was nothing glamorous, just an entry-level office position with a 2-hour commute and a cubicle the size of a coat closet. I was still eating instant noodles twice a week and learning how to keep my ancient Honda running without draining my entire paycheck. But then Mom called me one evening, sounding flustered, and told me their internet had been shut off. Just temporarily, she said, just until we get caught up. I didn't even think about it. I logged into my bank account, transferred $127, and fixed it. She cried, called me her little lifesaver. Promised to pay me back by the end of the month. I knew she wouldn't. I didn't care. That single payment turned into a routine. Over time, the numbers got bigger, the gratitude got smaller, and the expectation grew so silently it wrapped around my life before I even noticed. I paid for oil changes, medications, new phones, food deliveries when they were too tired to cook, and repairs for things they hadn't maintained in years. I drove them to doctor's appointments, read over legal documents they didn't understand, and stayed on hold with insurance companies during my lunch breaks at work. And each time I stepped in, each time I took something off their plate, they told me I was a blessing. A word that sounds nice, but feels cheap when it's the only acknowledgement you get. The worst part wasn't the money. I could always make more money. It wasn't even the time. What broke me eventually was the realization that none of it had ever bought me a deeper place in their hearts. Not a closer seat at the table, not a bigger slice of cake. It hadn't bought me visibility. Not real visibility, the kind where someone sees you not for what you can do, but for who you are. I remember one Christmas, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, when Brian had just gotten out of another failed relationship and was living in the basement again. The holidays were tight, and my parents were barely making ends meet. I covered most of the gifts that year, bought Dad the new tools he'd been eyeing, got Mom a Kindle loaded with her favorite books, even bought Brian a new pair of headphones after he accidentally broke his old ones during one of his tantrums. No one asked how I afforded it. No one said thank you more than once. And by the time dessert was served, I was doing the dishes alone while Brian told a story about a bar fight he almost got into, and my parents laughed like he was a sitcom character and not a grown man freeloading off their dwindling stability. That night, I went home, sat on the edge of my bed, and stared at my hands for what felt like an hour. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just deflated. Something inside me folded in on itself, like a tent collapsing after the storm has already passed. A few months later, Mom had a dental surgery she couldn't afford. She called me in tears, ashamed to ask, but just needed a little help to get through it. I drained half my savings. She promised again to pay me back. She didn't. Instead, a month later, she told me she and Dad were thinking of taking a weekend trip to the lake, just to unwind, because they'd been through so much. I nodded, smiled, said I was glad they were taking care of themselves. And I didn't mention the money. I never did. Because the moment you bring up the receipts, the illusion of love disappears, and all you're left with is a balance sheet of betrayal. Brian never offered to chip in. Not once. Not when I was paying the mortgage to save the house. Not when I covered the penalty to get their car out of impound. Not when I bought groceries during the months they said things were a little tight. He always said things like, "You're just better with money," or "They listen to you more." He didn't know, or didn't care, that I was drowning in responsibility while he floated on the surface, waiting for the next life raft. When I started therapy, it wasn't because I wanted to hate them. It was because I wanted to stop hating myself for needing them to love me better. The therapist asked me what I wanted from them. I said, recognition. She asked, what would that look like? I told her, a call on my birthday, a hug that doesn't feel like an obligation, a thank you that lands, anything really that feels like they know who I am and not just what I do. She nodded and said, you've been giving love with no receipts, hoping they'd eventually notice the cost. But people who get used to free labor rarely volunteer to start paying. That line stuck with me, haunted me even, because she was right. I had become their unpaid emotional employee. And the moment I stopped showing up, they didn't mourn the daughter they lost. They mourned the loss of convenience, the missing glue, the quiet nursemaid they could always count on when things went to hell. But I was done buying their affection. Done hoping that the next favor would be the one that finally made them see me. Done trading my peace for their comfort. Love, real love, shouldn't come with a ledger. But if it does, you should at least be able to flip it open and see both sides. Mine was filled with blank pages where their names should have been. The first official notice came folded neatly inside a white envelope with red ink stamped across the top. Urgent. Final warning. I found out about it through Tara again, who had become the family's accidental communication bridge, not because she volunteered, but because she was the only one left who still talked to everyone without completely losing her mind. She called me late in the afternoon, her voice low and cautious, asking if I had heard about the lien on my parents' property. I told her I hadn't, though I had a feeling it was only a matter of time. I knew the debts would eventually show up in daylight. All the things I used to quietly shoulder, now resurfacing like unpaid ghosts coming to collect. I sat on my couch with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to her read aloud the letter my parents had given her, their voices too strained, too tired, too desperate to handle the words themselves. Apparently, without my financial scaffolding in place, they had missed 3 consecutive mortgage payments, defaulted on 2 credit cards, and their property taxes hadn't been filed correctly, which flagged the IRS and triggered a review of the last 5 years. The funny part, if you could call any of this funny, was that I had been the one filing their taxes all along, using software under my own account, submitting their paperwork, correcting their math, explaining every change they never understood. When I stopped, everything collapsed faster than I even thought it would. No one was watching the machine anymore, and now they were shocked it had stopped running. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't even feel justified. I felt numb, like someone had opened a window in a house I no longer lived in, and now all the dust and cold was spilling inside. 2 days later, my mother called again. This time, she didn't bother with small talk or guilt-wrapped pleasantries. She just said, I need to talk to you, please. Her voice was softer than I remembered, not because she was calm, but because she was breaking. Something in her tone made me put the phone down gently on the table without ending the call, letting her speak into a room I no longer occupied. She talked for nearly 3 minutes straight, told me they didn't know how bad things had gotten, how much I had done, how much they had come to rely on my quiet stability. She said Dad wasn't sleeping. She said Brian was angry, confused, not sure what he did wrong. She said they were sorry. She said they were scared. And then she said something I hadn't heard from her in decades. Not since I was a little girl and she forgot to pick me up from school and arrived an hour late, breathless, frantic, hugging me so tightly it hurt. She said, "I don't know how to fix this." I wanted that sentence to do something to me. I wanted it to soften the edges, to make me reach for the phone and speak for the first time in months. But all it did was confirm what I had always known, that I had spent a lifetime fixing things for people who had never learned how to fix anything themselves. And I wasn't going to step back in and do it again. Not this time. Not when they only noticed me once, everything they stood on began to crumble. Brian reached out the following night, his message direct and laced with panic. He said he had been in a minor accident, nothing serious, just a skid on the wet road, but the motorcycle was damaged, and he needed help with the repairs. He assumed the insurance would cover it until he learned the policy had lapsed 3 months ago, around the same time I stopped paying the premium without telling anyone. He asked if I could just front the money, promised to pay me back as soon as he could, said it was urgent. I stared at that text, my mind wandering back to the birthday he never acknowledged, the years of thankless dependence, the way he soaked up praise that was never earned while I sat in the shadows stitching everyone's lives together. I didn't respond, not then, not ever. That weekend, I got a card in the mail. No return address, no handwriting I recognized. Just a single sentence printed in neat mechanical letters. "We see you now." I read it twice before tucking it into the drawer with the others. The stack of unopened apologies, forgotten birthdays, and letters full of delayed affection. Whether it came from one of them or someone else entirely, I would never know. But for once, it didn't matter. The point was never about being seen by them. It was about finally seeing myself. There's a kind of violence in being overlooked. It's quiet, but it cuts deep. It tells you, year after year, that your presence is conditional, your value negotiable, your worth measured only by your usefulness. And when you finally walk away, when you finally stop answering the calls and paying the bills and holding up the ceiling, they call it abandonment. But what they never ask is what it feels like to spend your whole life abandoned in plain sight. They didn't lose me on my birthday. They didn't lose me when they gave Brian that motorcycle. They didn't lose me when they forgot to call, or when they posted photos of his party while I sat alone in silence. They lost me slowly over years of absence disguised as tradition, neglect dressed up as normalcy, and when they finally noticed, it was already too late. Somewhere in another town, probably not too far from theirs, another birthday passed. My 38th, no cake, no party, no awkward song sung off key, just a quiet morning, a cup of coffee, a walk in the sun, and a sense of peace I had never known before. I didn't mark the day with any particular celebration. I didn't need to, because this year, for the first time, I didn't need anyone to remember it for it to matter. Some birthdays mark time, others mark change, but every now and then a birthday becomes something else entirely, a reckoning, a revelation, a silent declaration that the person you once were has finally stepped out of the role she was never meant to play. And if they ever look back, if they ever wonder when they lost me, they won't find a single moment they can point to. What they'll find instead is the echo of 1,000 missed chances, 100 unpaid debts, and one birthday that broke the bank, because it was the last one I ever paid for.